Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Power Hour panel. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Power Hour panel, where we get together and we discuss current events that are happening across the globe and right here in our great nation. Now, the two major things that we are going to discuss tonight are Biden's State of the Union address and the war going on between Russia and Ukraine. Now, tonight, Biden is in the process of giving his State of the Union address. And with him giving the State of the Union address, we do know that the beginning of his address was really discussing the war going on between Russia and Ukraine. Now, President Biden came out strong and really started talking about the strength of the Ukrainian people and how they have been essentially fighting back. And he has also condemned Putin for his essentially illegal attack on Ukraine. So Wade, let's go to you. What do you think about how President Biden came out and essentially spoke about the strength of the Ukrainian people?
Very rarely will you hear this from me in regards to Biden, but I agree with him. The Ukraine, what a lot of people forget is, stepping back into history for a minute, is when Ukraine was part of Russia, their scariest forces were the Ukrainians. They were the guys they sent in to do the things that they couldn't get done. So, and that's because they're just that good at not giving up. They will fight tooth and nail to the last man, and there is nothing that's going to stop them. So I for once, I agree with Biden. These guys are kicking ass in Ukraine, and I really am liking it. Especially that I think somebody like me's over there giving them tips, because there was a beer company that's putting labels on the bottles they're using to make Molotov cocktails that got a picture of Putin on it, and it says Putin's a dickhead on it. I think someone like me is leading that charge over there, and I'm okay with it.
So, Sean, what are your thoughts about President Biden coming out and really talking about the strength of the Ukrainian people and essentially condemning Putin like he's been doing for the past several months?
I agree with Wade. I actually had predicted that I think they would fall sooner than they are right now, and I think that it's very impressive what their resistance, which I would call a resistance, because I still don't think that the days ahead are going to be good for them, and I think it's going to get a lot harder, a lot worse for the Ukrainians. That's my personal opinion. I don't want it to happen. But I am impressed by their resilience. So, I mean, he's putting out something that's popular, not just here in the U.S., but around the world.
And I definitely agree with that. Now, with President Biden's State of the Union, there's going to be a lot of things that he has to talk about. Now, initially, the State of the Union was going to address domestic issues. However, because of the war that broke out in Europe, we are now seeing that a good portion of the State of the Union had to do with the war going on between Russia and Ukraine. However, the one thing that many people are looking to Biden to answer for is inflation. Now, while there's other metrics that look good for the economy, inflation is definitely something that people want answers for. So, Sean, do you think that Biden is going to be able to talk about the economy and inflation in a way that Americans will want to hear? Because again, Biden's ratings at the moment are extremely low. And one of the biggest reasons for that is because of inflation. So what are your thoughts, Sean?
He has no choice. His party is about ready to have a massive loss in the midterms. I think a devastating loss. I think it's very likely they will lose completely. If it was at this point right now, they would lose Congress altogether. And that's mostly because of the economic pain that Americans are feeling, regardless of their political views. I'm following what they're talking about in Texas, because Texas seems to be a very bellwether aspect of it. You got Florida and Texas, both are strongholds for GOP, but Democratic Party is losing massive amount of seats in Texas right now. And it's predicted that they're going to have a tidal wave of loss in Texas. So we'll see what happens in Texas. But his party, his future of his party, if he can't get a hold of that issue, they will control Congress and he will be in presidency. That's what it will be.
And then, Wade, what are your thoughts about Biden and inflation and the economy?
So it's always interesting when you listen to politicians talk about the economy, because they like to spin facts to their benefit. And here's what I mean by that. Biden states that he's overseen the largest or the fastest or the most job increase, whatever, in this year. Well, that's not really true. The last 6 months of Trump's presidency, it started to skyrocket and he walked right into it. Inflation, his plans to address inflation are the plans that he's had the entire time. They're the same plans that Trump had. And he hasn't done anything with them in the past year. But by waiting until now and then doing something about it before midterms, he can take that low rating and send it sky high again. So I think his entire plan to deal with inflation is solely based on the benefit it's going to give him and his party, not the American people.
Well, right now, inflation is something that the American people have to deal with. We are seeing the largest rise in inflation in the past decades. And it is something that is really holding President Biden down with his ratings and just the way that the American people views the current administration. Now, we're waiting to see what Biden is going to do in order to deal with inflation. And it looks as though he's going to be targeting the large carriers, the large ocean carriers, to ensure that they do not overcharge the American people. Do you think that this will be enough in order to curb inflation, or at least bring inflation down even slightly? And we'll go to you first, Sean.
I believe that 20 countries are agreed to release their reserves. Mm-hmm. And that just happened recently. It wasn't just the U.S. It was 20 other countries, because of the war, said that they would release strategic reserves. And oil actually went up. Did not go down on that news. So what does that tell me? That tells me that these companies are fleecing us, and they're continuing to fleece us. And they seem to have the approval of that fleece.
So we're going to talk more about Russia, and then later on this evening, Sohaila is going to join us to talk more about what is going on with Biden's State of the Union address, which is currently going on at the moment. But there is a lot going on in Russia at the moment as well. Now, Russia, initially when they started attacking, many people were saying that Russia was primarily targeting military bases and areas with low civilians. Now, the first day of the bombing, we could say that that was slightly true. But as of today, it seems as though Russia is completely targeting civilian heavy areas. So, Sean, what are your thoughts about Russia now targeting civilian areas?
I'm not surprised that this news is coming out, that there are civilians in a war, that there are civilians being hit by either accident or part of the collateral damage. I mean, that's collateral damage, we call it. I'm just not surprised by that. I mean, as soon as you start a war, there's going to be not just, I mean, if you drop bombs in any major urban city in the world, you're going to hit innocent people. You're going to affect innocent people. You're not just going to affect military installations.
Wade?
So I don't think Putin cares. Now, when I say this, most people wouldn't have started the war to begin with. But let's just say that you were going to start a war, right? Most normal people would focus on soldiers, military assets. They would focus on strategic points, strategic areas, things like that. Biden isn't focused. I mean, sorry, Putin isn't focusing on that. Putin's focusing on just creating pure chaos. And he doesn't care who gets in the way, whether it be a building full of civilians or a school. He's not going to care. He's just going to launch rockets to just launch rockets, tanks. And we've seen it with his armored personnel carriers just running over random cars and people. And there is no control, no logic, and no plan other than to create so much chaos the Ukrainians don't know which way to go. So I don't think he cares who he takes out.
So as of today, the Russian missile struck and hit civilian areas. It hit in Kharkiv, which is Ukraine's second largest city. There was missiles being launched near the hospital. There was missiles being launched and actually struck a government building. So again, initially, the first 2 days, Russia was really focused on targeting areas that had some type of military presence. But now it seems that Russia is switching its focus and is now going after civilian areas. Now, I do not believe that Putin thought that Ukraine was going to be able to fight back the way that they have. Now, the Western world is watching very intently. They're watching and they're sending lethal aid and they're sending financial aid as well. And we heard from Biden today during his State of the Union saying that they're giving over $1 billion to Ukraine for them to fight against Russia. So again, the United States and the Western world is pouring a lot of money and a lot of aid and probably a lot of intel as well into this war, even though they don't have boots on the ground just yet. So I do think that Russia is now looking to target civilian areas because they're being embarrassed in Ukraine. One of the largest militaries in the world is being pushed back by essentially civilians, by a mediocre military. So I do think that Russia is just trying to attack where it can. So essentially, they're not embarrassed on the international stage, even though the majority of the world has turned their back on Russia and issued out these sanctions and are condemning Russia for the illegal war, for the war crimes that they have committed. So Wade, what do you think about the way that Russia is attacking the civilian areas now?
There's no honor in war. And that is not any more obvious to people nowadays than what Putin's doing. I'm going to stick with my original statement, but that he doesn't care. And he's going to create as much chaos as he can. And if that means attacking civilian targets, he will attack civilian targets. He really doesn't care. If the Ukrainians have shown, the Ukrainian civilians have shown more human rights care than Putin has, for lack of a better term. When they, and I'm trying to choose my words very carefully because they're not a fighting force. They're just civilians. It's just
a lot of civilians fighting back.
Yeah, they're just grandma, they're grandpa, they're babushka, they're the guy down the street. They're the guy that delivers the paper, the milk. They aren't even a militia. They aren't anything that someone would consider a organized or trained fighting force, but they're doing it. And when they do it, and when they capture Russians, and captures a strong word. I just don't have another word for it. When they're detaining Russians from armored personnel carriers or ones that have run out of gas or something like that, they treat them more humanely, even though they're making fun of them, because it is funny to go, hey, you need to tow back to Russia. I mean, that's some funny shit. All right, I'm here to tell you. But they treat them more humanely than Putin ever would. So Putin doesn't care in any way, shape, or form about civilians, but the Ukrainians at least care for their fellow humans, Russians or not.
And then Sean, so again, Russia is attacking civilian areas now, but civilians are fighting back in the Ukraine. They're putting Russia's army to shame, even though missiles are coming towards these civilian areas. Again, Ukraine's second largest city was bombed today essentially near apartment buildings were bombed, government buildings were bombed. So what do you think, Sean, about the Ukrainian citizens really fighting back and putting the Russian military to shame?
I wouldn't say that they're being putting the military to shame. I think we're seeing some of the wins that they're getting and some of the areas they're getting, but they're not an organized force or an organized military. And I don't think the complete force of the Russian forces actually even entered Ukraine as we see it today. But I think there's a potential for a quagmire. I mean, we all have to remember, they got out of Afghanistan too. I mean, the Soviet Union got into Afghanistan in the late 70s. After that, there was a fall of the Soviet Union, and they had economic fall after Afghanistan. So, there's this trade-off between both of us have been in Afghanistan. You had the Russians in Afghanistan, the U.S. in Afghanistan. I think overall, there was a great interview recently on NPR that I listened to. It was a Russian in New York who she is the granddaughter of one of the presidents, previous presidents, and now lives in the United States most of her life and has been a professor here. And she gave an analogy that was profound. What she was saying is that Putin is actually going on this certain philosophy of a Soviet with Belarus. There's this area, right? There's three areas. There's the Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia. This is a Slavic space. And what they have bid through philosophy is believing that will create a Slavic area of the return of greatness to Russia. So he's not thinking of now. He's thinking of 100 years from now and what his legacy will be in that arena. And he follows that philosopher very tightly. And so what he's looking for is to become like the Putin the first and the Putin the second, the first and the third. And Putin the first was able to put the Slavic countries back together to create a Slavic uni in that part of the world. And that will be the way the story is told after all is said and done. That's what his hope is. But I don't understand our end game. I can understand what's our end game on this. Like, our end game is that they get out and then there's still all this damage and horrible actions that occurred. And then who's held accountable? I mean, do they get out tomorrow? I don't understand our end game on this.
So I think our end game is just to stop Russia from taking over Eastern Europe. I think that's really what it is. I don't think we have any big end game to it. The United States has been watching Russia for a very long time. Russia has essentially been committing I don't want to say cyber war against the United States, but they have been launching cyber attacks towards the United States. I know a lot of times we spoke about it during presidential elections, saying that Russia helped get President Trump elected. However, it wasn't that simple. Russia has been trying to destabilize the United States by sending bots in on social media and then various other types of cyber attacks. So I think right now with the United States and any type of end game, it's just to keep Russia at bay, because Russia has done a very, very good job in trying to destabilize the United States. Because again, when we go back to the elections, many people were focusing in on Putin helping President Trump win the election. However, that was not really the case. There were bots coming in and they had bots positioned on both sides of the aisle, essentially to divide America, to destabilize America. So I think right now with the intel that the government has about that situation, and then with Russia trying to declare war against Europe, They already started the war with Ukraine. I'm pretty sure Putin's going to try and push out further as well. So I think at this time, our only interest is keeping Russia at bay at the end of the day.
That seems very simplistic to me, that goal. But yeah, it seems like there's got to be a bigger goal. Yeah.
I mean, if you have a dictator, it's the same thing. Like if we go back to World War II with Nazi Germany, essentially that's what we're seeing now, except for the world is answering. We're not allowing Russia to do what the Nazis did. And we're going to talk a little bit about sanctions as well. But first, we're going to go ahead and go to the comments. So let's go ahead and go to the comments. Philip says, I agree with Sean. It's going to get worse. Lindsay says 200 more troops landed in Germany today. So let's talk about that. So in Biden's State of the Union speech, Biden really spoke about positioning troops in NATO countries essentially in Eastern Europe and surrounding Ukraine, because Biden has stated the moment that Putin tries to push west and attacks a NATO country, that the United States will essentially instantly join the war to protect its NATO allies. So Wade, what do you think about Biden saying that the moment that Putin pushes west and attacks NATO allies, the United States is joining the war?
So we talked last week, or the week before last, we talked about options, and I said, I think the U.S. is going to put people on the borders and not actually go into the Ukraine. I think it's going to be too late to stop whatever's coming by just lining troops up on the borders. I think that's like plugging the dam and watching more cracks appear. Sanctions are only good on paper. So, and what I mean by that is everyone's closing down their airspace to Russia, right? Nothing actually stops Russia from trying to go into other people's airspace. And I don't think people understand that. There's not this magical wall that appears where if a Russian plane comes near it, it just stops and it doesn't go forward, or it blows up, or it automatically turns around. That's not how this works. If a Russian plane tries to cross into closed airspace, it could kick off a war and not even have to be in the Ukraine or moving west of Ukraine. For example, we just closed our airspace in the U.S., right? Mm-hmm. And if a Russian plane were to fly into American airspace over Alaska, because you can see Russia from Alaska, for lack of a better term. You can and you can't, but you know what I'm saying. They're that close. For people who don't know, they're literally that close. You could almost throw a rock and hit Alaska from Russia. And geographically, what I mean compared to the rest of the world. If they were to fly over U.S. airspace, normally what we would do is we would send jets up, we would intercept them, we would turn them around, turn them back to Russian airspace. We would do everything we could to prevent an interaction. In this case, if they kept flying straight, we would have no choice but to defend America. And the moment we fire on that plane, we are in World War III. So I don't think it matters if they push into NATO countries, pushing west past Ukraine. They have 100 more options that nobody's watching right now that could kick off a war. So I think that's where I'm going to stick with that.
So when we talk about closing American airspace to Russia, and again, this is not the United States doing this. This is the United States, who just announced it today. It's Canada, and it is the European Union. They're closing off airspace. Now, again, it's not for Russian tourists. it's not for warplanes because they're not expecting them to fly in at this moment. It's essentially for oligarchs. Because as we know right now, because of the state of Russia's economy, the Russian oligarchs are now trying to flee Russia in order to continue living their life of luxury.
But it doesn't matter.
So by closing off this Russian airspace, that's stopping the charter jets, that's stopping, and it's not just the charter jets too, because the United States has stated that they're going after the oligarchs. So they are seizing their yachts, they're seizing their private jets, they're essentially seizing assets so they can hold them accountable.
I'm not talking about the oligarchs. I'm talking about simply crossing into, it could be anything. It could be a commercial 747. It could be a military jet. It could be the oligarchs. It doesn't matter. It's not just the oligarchs. That virtual wall for closed airspace, any Russian plane, it could be a Russian hot air balloon that crosses it, and it could start a war. It doesn't have to be moving west from Ukraine.
And then, Sean, what are your thoughts? Again, so we'll go back to the initial question about Biden stating that if Putin tries to move west into any NATO territory, into any of the allies' territories, that the United States will enter into war. Now, again, does have to do with the treaty that we have with NATO. But what are your thoughts about Biden saying that today during his State of the Union address?
Well, the Europeans get to judge what Article 5 will activate. What we're talking about is Article 5. Article 5 activates that pact, and it says that Article 5 has been enacted. Once Article 5 gets enacted, then that's what it is. I mean, that's what the agreement was. Wade brings up an interesting point, but there's another aspect to that point, which is the ocean side of it, not just the air side of it. And so right now in Turkey and the Black Sea, they've already, there's Russian ships have been taken in. I mean, they've been, taken out of the water, and they've been taken on, and they've been taken out. They haven't been destroyed, but I'm saying they said you can't go through here. And then the Turkish are also saying, who are part of NATO, saying that they're violating aspects to the Black Sea right now. Russian ships are going through the Black Sea. That in itself, as a NATO country called Turkey could activate that if they choose it, and Europeans agree, could activate it. So I kind of agree with Wade. There's a lot of simple things that can add up to a bigger thing that would activate an Article 5, for NATO to advise the U.S. that we're in that state. So there's a lot of things that could happen that could activate it, not just them going into Poland or any of the other countries. Now, of course, if they do go into borders, I mean, that's an obvious one, but it doesn't take that. I agree with Wade. It doesn't take that such an obvious thing of them rolling through a NATO border for this to be activated. Yeah, we're in a very tenuous situation with this.
So I do think the U.S. is fully prepared to go to war. I do think that something's going to happen to set off the Americans going into war, whether it is Article 5 of the NATO agreement or whether it is planes crossing into airspace that they should not be into. The United States is fully prepared to go to war. We have been sending troops out. Like Lindsay said, 500 more troops were sent, and it looks as though Putin may start moving. Now, the question is, will Putin start moving into countries that are not a part of NATO? I'm going to pull up this comment by Roger here. Now, Roger says, never mind Putin attacking a NATO country. What if he continues west into Moldova, not a NATO member, a country with many ethnic Russians? So the next question is, will the United States enter into war if Putin continues to push west, but not necessarily into a NATO country? Again, President Biden tonight stated in his State of the Union that the moment that Putin, and it doesn't even have to activate Article 5, Europe doesn't even have to do that. Biden says the moment that Putin moves west into a NATO nation, he will go to war against Russia. But what do you guys think is going to happen if he moves west into countries that are not members of NATO? And Sean, we'll go to you first.
Well, I think that's part of his agenda. I mean, he started with Crimea. Now he's went to Ukraine. He has Belarus. he's working out of Belarus, and his military is working out of Belarus. So I think it's part of the agenda, and it's part of that bigger overall thing that I was saying, that he's looking to the historic aspect of his history, of what his legacy would be, and that is to unite those countries that are Slavic countries. And it makes a lot of sense to me that he just says, okay, well, I'll go the other way then. I won't. I'll just kind of keep poking at this bear for a little while, and do that. I think we are at war right now. It's just not physical war; it's economic war. We're in economic war right now with Russia, and so is EU and other places around the world.
Yeah. So Philip says, remember, he was a KGB director, and he believes in the old USSR old mentality. Let's see. Philip says, definitely, Mel, we are going to war. Lindsay says, if he makes it to Moldova, the Ukraine is lost. Roger also says, there are two parts of Article 5. The member country's attack must still request a NATO response. The UK did not trigger Article 5 in 1982 when Argentina invaded the Falklands. Having said that, Putin should be confident that Article 5 will be triggered. And then Lindsay says, because at the point, he's got all sides of Ukraine. Oh, yep, that is completely true there. So I do agree with you, Sean, when you say that we are in an economic war. I think right now, I think it's more reminiscent of Cold War rather than a global conflict right now. Right now, because boots on ground is Russia and Ukraine, I agree with the concept that we're at an economic war. We're winning the economic war. I just don't know if I like calling it war at this time. And then Wade, do you want to read some of the smoke and bacon comments?
So I'm being very, very cautious with my words tonight because of the state that the world's in. So I'm going to be cautious with some of the smoke and bacon comments too.
Okay.
Which is not normally my way, but there's a lot of thinking that we have to do right now and interacting. So Las Vegas says, bringing shipping industry to heel is not going to be enough. It's a shiny thing for the cameras. Not to derail the discussion, but Ukraine has certainly illustrated why civilians should be armed. IT department says sanctions only matter to people who respect the demands of other nations. IT department also says closed airspace is like a no trespassing sign on a fence. Las Vegas asks, but are the oligarchs actually truly having their physical assets seized?
I'll answer that. Yeah. So Europe, so EU, UK, United States have pretty much decided that that's what they're going to do. Again, they're trying to keep this from being an all-out global conflict with boots on the ground, and they're doing that by essentially cutting off money from Russia. Again, the economy is what they're trying to do, and by stopping the oligarchs from being able to leave Russia, it's definitely going to have an economic impact on them. And
I think the question comes down to, has anybody actually taken an oligarch yacht or plane or bank account yet?
No, because this is new. This is new. The seizure is new.
Okay.
Perfect. So let's go ahead and talk about sanctions. So right now, many countries are putting sanctions against Russia, with the United States, again, putting heavy sanctions on Russia in order to show that they condemn what Putin is doing. They condemn what Putin is doing, and they are trying to essentially shut down Russia's economy. Now, one of the biggest sanctions that me personally, I think, was the sanctions from SWIFT. So basically kicking out a lot of Russian banks, not all the Russian banks, but a lot of the Russian banks from the SWIFT system. So essentially that global banking system is stopping movement of
We got some freezing.
I didn't realize I was on mute.
Yeah, you're right. I was going to try to tell you you're mute.
Having a whole conversation.
Yeah. I was like, what is he talking about?
I was talking about how, Mel's talking about Putin, so she got the pooty poot boot. He got rid of her. He got tired of hearing of his name. But I think what she was going to talk about with the sanctions about is how it's affecting the Russian people. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the Russian people will see a lot of pain. So will we here in the U.S. in some ways, some economic pain at the pump and other areas. Yeah, they'll see a lot of pain, but they've seen that. They all have seen that before. I mean, it's almost like they've seen that throughout their generations of unstableness in their currency, and there's generations of that who remember that.
Yeah.
So it's it's just like the elephant in the room for me on the sanctions. Like, well, if you hurt the average person, I mean, I don't think that's what we're trying to do is hurt the average person. In any of the countries, including Russia, why hurt the average person?
Well, I can understand the logic of the sanctions hitting the upper class and the elite and all that. But personally, I think when you have a society as large as Russia, and this could be backwards because I would think that a society as large as Russia, when you start to affect them personally, that they would be rising up against their dictator leadership. But they've been trained not to for so long that they're just going to roll with it. Whereas if you, here in the U.S., for example, if we had something going on like this, we would be rising up against our leadership and getting rid of them. So I think that's the difference. I think that by the sanctions hitting the elite have a better chance in Russia of getting Putin to back down than if his entire country rised up against him, which it really won't.
I'm really asking the question: what's the purpose of him back down now after all he's done, after the level they're at right now and the damage they've caused and the military they built up and the infrastructure they have in place and everything they have on the ground? Why would you just turn around right now?
Well, at this point, let's compare for a second. All right. So a lot of the same questions were asked about like Saddam and things like that. Plenty of countries could have took out Saddam while he was sitting on the shitter reading a newspaper, and they chose not to, and it just got worse and worse and worse. Plenty of countries could have took out Putin, and they haven't. And here's where we are now. So we've got a choice to make. If he continues doing stupid shit, do we just wait for him to stop on his own so that he can do it again later? Or do we just end this? If we're going to go to war, let's go to war and end it.
So I'm going to disagree with you there, Wade. I do think that sanctions are the proper thing to do at the moment because the moment that America enters into the war, it becomes World War III. Now, I know you guys know that I've been very hesitant to use the term World War. I keep saying global conflict, but the moment that America enters into the war, which it will eventually enter in, it becomes a world war.
That's what I'm saying. If we're going to war, if we enter into the war, let's fucking end it. If we've got the entire world against Russia,
listen,
let's end it.
Would you rather go to war against a weakened Russia who has no money and their military is already strained and pretty much they're being contained to an area, or would you rather go in now? Because Putin is not going to back down. Putin is not going to back down now. He's not going to back down in a couple weeks, a couple months. He has his eye on the prize. Now, something else that I do want to bring up as well, while the majority of the Western world is putting sanctions on Putin, the whole world isn't. We're seeing that different countries are popping up and saying that they should not put sanctions on Russia. Now, I'm going to pull up this comment from Lindsay. Lindsay says, Mexico, I believe I saw, will not issue any sanctions. And that is 100% correct. Mexican President Lopez Obrador said, "We are not going to take any sort of economic reprisal because we want to have good relationships with all governments in the world." But he goes a step further and he says, "I don't agree with the fact that the media from Russia or any country is."
See that?
Yeah, that's it. I kind of. Well, she was getting to the point where I kind of agree. I don't know why we're censoring media. Even if they are media of that, why are we censoring, or any of the countries are censoring Russian media? I don't understand that. I mean, is what's the purpose of us? What we wouldn't win in the reverse. I don't understand, even if that is misinformation or not. I agree with him, the Mexican president on that. Like, okay, well, they're too afraid that it's going to be so convincing to people that, we have to like not have it.
So here's my logic. So you have right now, you have a line going right down the middle, for lack of a better term. You have people aligning. You have countries aligning. Maybe not Mexico, because Mexico's the Latin French. I don't know. So they like to surrender. So you have these countries aligning to either side. You're going to either align to the NATO Western world, or you're going to align with Russia. And we've already seen that China is aligning with Russia. We've seen that North Korea is aligning with Russia. There's a few other places that are aligning with Russia. I saw a list. I don't remember them all. Okay. So let's just say right down the middle of the planet, boom, we got a side here and a side here. We're going to go to war. And it doesn't matter when we go to war if you want to have a good relationship with every country or not. You're going to get dragged in some way, shape, or form. Look at Sweden. Sweden is like the most neutral country ever. Now, don't get me wrong. Back in the day, the reason the Pope has Swedish troops is because they were some of the best in the world. They were some of the best mercenaries, the most well-trained, and they did not flip for money. When they made an agreement, they stuck with it. But I digress. So Sweden has this policy of neutralism. Even Sweden said, hey, normally we're not going to take either side, but this time we're taking a side. So we are lining up right down the middle of who's going to join who. And when we do this, and again, I don't like using World War III. When we do this, we're going to end up into a World War situation. And it's going to be a war to end all wars, in my opinion. Because IT department is right. Putin has no problems pushing the button and launching the nukes. He has no problems destroying the entire earth from under you. If he can't have it, nobody can. So I see that line developing between who's going to join what side. And at that point, it's not going to be about politics or sanctions. It's going to be about ending this once and for all.
So I want to pull up these comments. So let's see. So Lindsay says, the Swiss shocked me when I saw that. That was me. So Roger says, please don't talk of nuclear war as though it could be won. Putin's biggest risk at the moment is internal coup. Russians, and particularly senior military government officials, need to realize that nuclear exchange is seriously possible. And I think that's something that's really important. I'm happy that you guys brought that up, is that, again, another reason why the United States has to be cautious about entering into war when they enter into war is because of the possibility of nuclear war. And I'm going to agree with you when you said, wait, that Putin is not afraid to do it. Putin has one thing in mind. He wants to return to the glory of the Soviet era. And he's going to do that, and he's going to take everyone down with him as well. So I'd
like to modify that statement a little bit that I made. I don't think he's going to do it with nuclear rockets. I think the rockets and the missiles are going to be secondary. I think the first thing is going to be the dirty bombs.
I agree. I think dirty bombs are coming too. I definitely think it's coming sooner rather than later. Lindsay says, I feel like we're living in a Tom Clancy novel. So when we talk about sanction, we also have to talk about, and we spoke about it a little bit with Mexico, is countries not putting sanctions at Russia at this time. Now we see with Lopez that he's not, because he says he wants to have good relationships with governments. However, we're going to have to start looking at a lot of the leftist South American countries as well, especially since they're so close to the United States, because they're not going to put sanctions on Russia, and they may even side with Russia as things get bigger. So it may not just be the Western world versus Russia. Russia may have allies in their back pocket that they will be able to utilize once the war becomes global. You have the leftist countries in South America. You have China, which still isn't condemning Russia. And again, they're working on deals under the table as well. So right now, while Russia's economy is sinking, I think Russia is going to be okay with various deals that they're going to work out with China, especially when it comes to oil and whatnot. So I do think that we have to pay attention to these countries that are not putting sanctions on Russia. Now, again, there's countries that are putting sanctions on Russia, like the Swiss, that haven't put sanctions on anyone before. So what do you guys think? Do you guys think there's greater implication from these countries that are choosing to not put sanctions on Russia? And then, Sean, I'll go to you.
There's a complete loophole in the sanctions. I don't know where you got that. The complete loophole in the sanctions that we're imposing do not include oil and gas at all. There is no refining aspect of Russian oil or gas is being restricted. Zero, nothing coming from us.
Let me correct myself. While it's not, I keep having this conversation with people. While the sanctions are not with oil and gas, private companies are starting to sever ties with Russia. So again, while there's no government sanction, companies like Shell are now severing ties with Russia. So that is actually coming from private sector and not from government sanctions. So thank you for catching me on that one, Sean.
Well, and you're seeing that happen in Congress right now, where they're trying to hit Biden with the aspect that U.S. is still buying Russian oil and gas. So, I mean, there is a big contradiction in these sanctions. They're saying that the sanctions, of course, would hit the EU the same way. And you have to remember what Mexico is in. I mean, Mexico is one of the biggest oil producing countries in all of the Americas, not just in the world, actually. So it's right there. I mean, they have to deal with them. They don't have a choice. It's that they have to deal with us. I mean, they're in a no-win situation with that. And a different situation for Canada, because Canada has to buy, but it's buying from us. It's largely buying from us. Not as much as it's buying from Russia, but I mean, I just don't understand the contradiction of that. Okay, they're worried about that affecting global markets and global economy. We go to very unstable, both in the U.S. or in Europe, if we do put major sanctions on oil and gas. But that is their bread and butter in Russia. That is what they make money from. So they're going to make the money from that during this whole conflict, and they're still selling it to us. I mean, we're selling it to us. And they're still making money off it while we're saying that we're putting sanctions on them. It doesn't make sense to me.
So I got the unpopular opinion of the day. You ready?
Let's hear it.
Keystone Pipeline was going to produce close to 900,000 barrels of local oil. We bring in almost 500,000 barrels a day from Russia. Just saying.
Yeah, I mean, we're bringing up issues because there's issues that
So
are starting,
I do
starting
think
not to make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
They're starting to not make a lot of sense. We're starting to question them. And those people have questioning minds about what are the intentions and what are the end games, what are the intentions. And if we're talking about World War III or nuclear war, I mean, everybody knows they're a nuclear power and we're a nuclear power. And that's, I mean, Ukraine, what's Ukraine going to do to a nuclear power? Please, nothing. They're going to do nothing to a nuclear power. It's just a matter of time before they collapse.
But it would be funny to see Ukraine push into, I told Mel this the other day, I would love to see Ukraine hold off the Russian troops. And the Russian troops go, okay, we're done. We're going to surrender, whatever. And Ukraine goes, go fuck yourself, and takes a few Russian border villages and raises a Ukrainian flag. I think that would be some funny shit.
it'd be funny, but I don't think it's going to happen.
It's not going to happen, but it'd be funny as hell. So,
So I want to talk about this because we are talking about private sectors, and thank you for. I keep talking about the oil market when it comes to Russia, and even tonight we saw in the State of the Union, Biden addressed how the United States and 30 other countries have gone into reserves. Now, like Sean stated, the sanctions are not attacking the oil industry specifically with Russia, but again, private sector is doing it. So I went ahead and I stated that Shell has decided to cut ties with Russian oil. Philip says that ExxonMobil just did the same thing. And Lindsay says BP did it first and had the largest financial pull. So do you guys believe with the private sector, with these oil companies severing ties with Russia, do you think that that will have a big enough economic impact on Russia, especially since Russia, when it comes to oil, Russia's king? I'm gonna go to you first, Sean.
I think they can provide China with all they need, and China's more than happy to take it.
so I think there's a bigger problem. And it's a problem that's been revealed by the world pandemic. And America used to be a country that built its own stuff, that had its own infrastructure, that survived on its own 2 feet. For the most part, let's just say 90%, because there's always people that helped us, and we've always helped people. But we did not rely on foreign powers the way we do now for everything. Hell, even our military uniforms are made in China. All right, come on now, folks. Most American flags are made in China. I think there's a bigger problem that's going to come about when China, which is aligning with Russia, says we're not doing anything for the Western powers anymore because they can cripple the world faster than most people.
So Biden addressed this today in the State of the Union. So they're trying to have this bipartisan plan in order to level the playing field and buy American from beginning to end. And essentially,
it'll take decades to restructure America for this. It'll take decades, if not a century.
I still think there's a possibility. I think that America is shifting towards that. So again, Biden in the State of the Union says he wants to make investments in research, development, and emerging technologies to, again, buy American from beginning to end. But I do think that we're going to see a world divided. I think China and Russia had this planned prior to 2021. I think when Putin was planning to invade, because if you remember back in November, December of 2021, that is when Putin first started putting troops along the border of Ukraine. And many people believe that the intel that they were receiving was going to become a reality. Several months later, we are here. I do think Putin is not afraid of the sanctions because Russia and China already worked out how they're going to restructure their economy, again, with oil to sell to one another and essentially partner up. And these are two large economies that could basically sustain themselves between each other and then with a lot of the leftist countries in South America. So I think Russia's economy, even though it's being hit hard now, once they start opening the door and selling more to China, especially with oil, I think Russia's economy is going to start leveling out. So just putting that there. Sean, thoughts about that?
When you talk about Latin America, I'm not really in agreement on that, kind of like that there's some kind of power structure in that Latin American market. I mean, we have long controlled the Latin American space, and we have long controlled the government of those Latin American countries. And we have long had agreements in most of those countries. When we talk about Venezuela or Nicaragua is very much aligned, with Russia, but they're a very significant country in the whole realm of this complicated world we're talking about. They're not like China complicated or China powerful, none of those countries in Latin America have any major, besides Brazil and Mexico, major economic powers. Okay, so the other ones are relatively, minor economic powers in the world. And we have had a huge amount of involvement in those countries over periods of time, for good and bad. We did a little economic development in those countries, but we've taken a lot from them. And in that whole arena that what he has, I'm not totally agreeing with the Latin American alignment with Russia. I think it's way too complicated, and I don't think it will have a big impact overall. That's my personal opinion. But the alignment with China is a completely different world order. We're talking about a completely different world. If Russia and China are really in alignment, here's where I see the alignment go. As soon as we had the pandemic, China went to digital currency. Now, everybody's never talking about that. They're not why did China go to digital currency? Russia's already forming digital currency as we meet. And then as we look at the sanctions coming out, they're going, fine, we'll go to a digital ruble. We'll go to a digital ruble. We'll escalate. And then China's doing the same thing. So then they say we trade digital currency between China and us. And then the U.S., where's the U.S. and the Western players in that? They have to go into our system. We're going to create a new system. We don't have to go into your system. We'll create a new monetary system. And I think that's exactly where they're headed. And I think that was the pre-planning. The pre-planning is that. It's an economic pre-planning.
So I definitely agree with you. I'm going to pull up this comment from Amanda. So Amanda says, Latin America needs us. They would never align with Russia.
I don't agree with that.
I completely disagree. Latin America is essentially sick of America. They have been for years. And the thing about it is, if we go to war with Russia, if we have boots on the ground, and I want to welcome Sohaila to the show. Hey, Sohaila, how are you?
Hey, doing good. Okay, like I'm actually on my phone right now because we were just watching the speech.
Perfect. So I'm going to answer this question from Amanda, and then we're going to jump in and talk about the State of the Union. So Latin America, I think countries, Venezuela, moving out of Latin America, looking at Cuba, I do think these powers, if we do go into a global conflict, will align themselves with Russia, and their proximity to the states will make them excellent places to put military bases. So again, while they may not be a huge economic factor, I do think strategically they could be very good strategic partners for a war, for a boots on ground war. So again, I'm not talking about an economic war. I'm not talking about a cyber war. I'm talking about an actual boots on ground type of war. I think their proximity and again, their annoyance with the United States opens the door for that. And that's where I say that there will be countries in Latin America, if we do go to global conflict, that will align itself with Russia. And before we jump to Sohaila, does anyone want to respond to that?
I don't see it happening, but yeah, I don't see that happening.
I don't see it happen. I think here's what I think needs to happen. All right. Right now, you have all the big kids in the room stomping their feet. That's what you have. And if we remember, the last World War was ended by a completely tragic event. Matter of fact, 2 of them. But it ended the war. I think what we need is a small country right now. I think what we need is that small country that doesn't have that, like Sean said, has a minimal financial impact, that has a minimal, that doesn't rely on either one of us for too much. I think we need them sitting at the head of the table saying, look, children, sit down, shut up, let's talk. I think that's what we need right now.
So let's move into Biden's State of the Union. Now, Sohaila was our correspondent that was tasked with watching the rest of the State of the Union because we were watching it before we went live, but we did have to go live, even though we pretty much had it on in the background while we were talking about Russia. But Sohaila, you sat from beginning to end with President Biden's State of the Union. Tell us about it. What were the high points? What were the low points?
Yeah, so first of all, I could barely hear you, so because I'm on my cell phone, so I'm just going to go down what I wrote down. I mean, the highlights for me. The first I'd say the first 10, 12 minutes was, of course, all about Putin and what he's doing in Ukraine and how they're pounding Ukraine. really badly. But Biden did oppose sanctions by, with the planes, not letting them in their airspace. Also, he said Putin's war will weaken Russia more and will make the world stronger. He did talk about the economy. 6.5 million jobs have been made so far with him in there. Our infrastructure is ranked 13th in the world, so we definitely need help there. Also, what was really cool is about Intel is going to buy up pretty much Ohio in the countryside there, and the CEO Pat, I think it was Greenmer. I don't remember his last name, but they're going to be getting jobs there. They're going to be having from 20 billion to 100 billion in investments there. He kept saying, let's make it in America. Finally, that would be nice. He did want to raise the taxes, or not taxes. He wanted to bring up the minimum wage to $15. Of course, the Republicans didn't like that. They just sat down. Let's see. He also wanted to cap insulin at $35 a month because it's like triple. Yeah, right. I know, it's ridiculous.
We give drug addicts free drugs. You can
Well, this
call
is
the United
insulin
States
for
government right now and get a free
diabetics.
crack pipe, but diabetics
No, this is
gotta
for
pay
diabetics, though. He was
$2,000
talking
a month.
about the insulin for diabetics.
That's what I'm saying. We give away
Let's
free.
see.
We give away free literal drugs to people, but diabetics like my mom got to pay $400 or $500 a month for insulin. That's ridiculous.
Okay,
So
I could barely hear you, but I heard you saying it's ridiculous.
He's got a voice. Yeah.
What the one that I really liked and praised him was anybody under 400K a year absolutely won't pay another dime in taxes. That's what he says. So that's a good thing. It'd be nice to make 400K a year.
That's ridiculous.
If I make $400K a year, does it matter if I pay an extra dime in taxes?
Okay, well, that's me. I'm over and out because I can't hear you guys. I'm on the phone, so I will definitely be with you guys next Tuesday. I promise. I miss you guys so much. Just work has been taking its toll, which is a good thing. Fun work, real estate. Just went into escrow again today. Thank goodness. So yay. Okay, I will talk to you guys later. Thank you so much. So Hayla, over and out.
So Hayla was our correspondent watching the rest of the State of the Union for us. So what do you guys think about President Biden's plan to essentially cap insulin? Now, many people have been calling for this insulin, chemo, and even Amanda says there needs to be a reform. So what do you guys think about it? And do you think that he will actually be able to do it? Now, again, on the campaign trail, President Biden promised a lot of things that many people think are a little bit far left practices, such as minimum wage, such as prescription drugs, such as student loan forgiveness. Do you think that this plan to cap insulin at a certain price is going to fall to deaf ears? Is this going to be one of those promises that he can't complete? Or do you think that he'll be able to do it? And then Wade, we'll go to you first.
Honestly, and I'm going to give you an example. Here in Virginia, insulin was capped 2 years ago at $50. But only a specific insulin. The one that 99% of people use is not capped at $50. So when he says that, I'm interested to know, is it going to be across the board? Or is it going to be like that? We're going to cap this one, but these people have an exclusion. And more than likely, we're going to have an exclusion event because they're going to get lobbied to keep these certain ones excluded.
Sean.
A lot of Americans don't know what I'm about ready to say. and it'll be irritating to hear it, especially if you're on health. You're a person that needs medication and has to use your health insurance to do it. In the corporate world, if you create a monopoly that is supposed to be broken up, okay, a monopoly meaning two companies get together and say it's a very needed product in our society, and it says you cannot say I'm going to raise prices on you, and then I'm going to raise prices on you, and we'll get together and raise prices. And that is called monopoly. So we're supposed to have laws in place to keep that from happening so that we don't get fleeced in our society by corporations. Well, the health insurance space has no such protections of us. Health insurance people can talk to each other, all the different corporations that insure people, and they can fix the rate. So they can say it's $75 for insulin, and then the other companies can go, we want $100 for insulin, and then they all say, let's get together like a little cabal and all agree at $100. Mm-hmm. And maybe we'll put $125, and there's nothing that can be done because the law protects us, not you.
Yep. And we can't fix these issues at home. We need to fix some of these issues before we try and fix other people's issues. And I know that's a played out line of logic and argument that we've heard everything from the hippies in the 70s to before then to now to the millennials. Everybody says the same thing. But we're not doing it. We're not fixing it. And a lot of these statements that Biden made in the State of the Union are just applause grabbing statements. Like closing Russian airspace in America. Oh, gee, we don't run many fucking Russian airplanes through our airspace. It doesn't hurt them. It's an attention-grabbing line. I'm going to cap insulin. It's an attention-grabbing line. Until you have the plans in place to do this, or you actually do it, it's all about stroking your own ego and getting your rating up. Because remember all the things he promised to do on his campaign trail that he hasn't done or couldn't do. And let's be honest for a second. If he was anybody else other than Biden, who was a vice president, so he's aware of what the presidential abilities are and aren't, I would think, okay, maybe he thought he could do something, and in reality, he couldn't. Because that happens. We all think we can accomplish something, and then when we get there, we just can't because of whatever the reason is. But he knows what can be done and what can't, and he hasn't fulfilled his obligations now. So all the rest of these things, the insulin and everything else, is just attention grabbing.
It works very well in certain parts of the country.
So I will say that
they're targeting voters with it.
Yep.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mel.
So I will say this about the insulin bill. So back in 2021, this is when the capping the insulin bill at $35 actually started coming into place. So it passed the House, and it's about to go to the Senate to vote. I'm not sure exactly when they're voting for it, but capping insulin for out-of-pocket costs for $35 maximum is already in play. It's just getting it past the Senate now.
Again, it's been in play for 2 years here in Virginia, and it's still not in play. It's been passed, but it isn't in play.
They're playing a little game, like you said in there. They're playing some medications will be this, some medications will be that, and really that is about the insurance industry. It is not about the healthcare industry. It is about how the insurance industry makes a massive fortune off of people being sick.
A cured client is no longer a return client. So
let's go to the comments. Wade, do you want to pull some of the comments from Smoke and Bacon?
Sure. So IT department says, going backwards here, China cannot afford to sanction the Western world. Las Vegas says Biden is trying to steal Trump's America's First agenda. IT department says the U.S. will never restructure that way. Too damn cheap. Can you imagine a $200 pair of Wranglers because they are U.S. made? Latin America has far too many despots who will get support from Russia. Las Vegas Luddite says maybe not upfront taxes, but hidden taxes. $18 per gallon of gas, $25 per gallon of milk, because the devil is in the details.
All right, so let's
This
go
is
to
gonna
some of
be-
these
I think
comments.
this- Yeah, this is going to be interesting right now because I think the unpopularity of Biden right now is showing, because there's people that really would normally support him and are not supporting what's going on because they're just not happy with what they're seeing, and they're not happy with how we're coming out of the pandemic in some ways. And so there was people that didn't favor him before that, but I mean, the independents are really abandoning right and left, the independent space. And so, I mean, in order for him to have major wins, I mean, we're going to see that. So we're in a really bad situation that we have a president that really needs a lot of support to hold Congress or hold that, and also to be reelected. And then we also have this dangerous situation in Europe, which could be a great distraction. I mean, we got the potential of a war president, right? So, yeah, it's disturbing in the least to me.
I agree. Let's see. Let's go to these comments. This is going back to the insulin topic. So Amanda says it's crazy how much money you can make and still be considered working poor. So taxes are important, but we need $20 per hour, not 15.
I completely disagree. I completely disagree.
All right, let's talk about it.
All right, and here's the reason I disagree. It is a unending loop, and here's why. People said, "Oh no, prices won't go up if you give everybody $15 an hour." Prices went up. Inflation went up. People want to make the same amount of money that they're making now, i.e. the corporations, regardless of what they pay you an hour, so the prices are going to go up. So if we go from $15 to $20 an hour, while that seems better for the American worker, in reality, everything else is going to go up because the people making the profit want to maintain the same profit. The problem is the profit, not the hourly rate, and that's what people aren't seeing. So yeah, you want a McDonald's guy to make $15 an hour. Okay, great. So McDonald's gets rid of the guy making $15 an hour and puts a kiosk in his place. What have you actually done? Or they take the McDonald's burger and they raise the price. Now the burger that was 99 cents is now $3 to pay for that. You haven't done anything. All you've done is given people more money to spend the same amount, so you're still in a bigger hole. And when people make more money, you end up in a higher tax bracket. You pay more taxes and you actually make less on the back end. So we don't need $15 and $20 an hour. We need to cut the profits of some of these big ass corporations is what we need to do.
So I'm going to wholeheartedly disagree with you. Now, this number is coming from 2021. So this is prior to that massive spike in inflation. And here's why I think minimum wage needs to go up past 15, even past 20. If minimum wage would have continued to keep up pace with inflation, and again, this is prior to that massive explosion of inflation that we saw at the tail end of 2021 and the beginning of 2022. If minimum wage would have kept up with inflation, minimum wage today would be $26. Now, I'll agree with you on this point, Wade. I do think profits, what we're dealing with profits, it does need to be capped, or some type of legislation needs to be put in place to ensure, that just looks like raising minimum wage. I also think we need to look at, I just lost my train of thought. But again, so going back to what I was initially saying, it would have been $26. Now it's before the explosion of inflation. But that's what I was going to say. The salaries of CEOs, the inflated salaries of CEOs. Because if CEO salaries, I don't have the exact numbers, but if CEO salaries would have kept up with pace, or kept up with inflation, it would be much lower than what CEOs are being paid today. So essentially, at a certain point in our history, we stopped paying everyday workers. We stopped paying middle managers. We stopped paying anyone who's not a C-level executive the money to keep up with inflation, and we just boosted the amount of money that we pay CEOs. Sean, thoughts on the minimum wage?
Both two parties have had different economic views for a very, very long time. The Conservative Party has very much had the Freeman view, which is a trickle-down economic theory, which means the people at the top create jobs and create employment, and then that allows the stabilization of that, and then bring people into work. There's a labor mix between growth on top, middle income, lower income. Then the reverse, where it says if the lower income gets more money, they'll spend more things. And since 2/3 of our economy is based on consumerism, that's the philosophy behind the raising of the minimum wage, so that we'll buy more things with more money. We get paid more, so we'll buy a bigger TV, and we'll buy more shoes, and we'll buy a car, and we'll buy that, and we'll buy all these appliances, and we'll buy all these other things that we don't always need, but that feeds the economy. Okay. And these two different economic policies have been clashing for some time. And the pandemic has made a very blatant clash between these two economic spaces right now. And it's just opening up a whole realm of what that means. Like, do any of these work? Do both of these work? Are they both failing? And I think that's the analogy we're looking at right now, is where we need a new economic system that is in either that or that, and it's not working for the average person. We are seeing in the pandemic that the elite of America is getting really, really rich, super rich. Corporations are getting super rich. But the average person is just getting hammered over and over again for every imaginable cost. Here in California, we're seeing our actual electric companies doubling the price of electricity on people. Doubling. That means you used to pay $50 for your electricity, and you just got a bill for $250 the next month. Explain that. Where is that coming from, and how that's allowed? Okay, because it's still the same electricity. Okay.
So I want to use that as an example, because that's a good point, Sean. When I look at my electric bill, I've upgraded my house because I have the ability to, being a contractor, which a lot of people don't. I've upgraded my house to energy efficient everything. The only two things in my house that are not energy efficient is the stove and the dryer. Everything else is the most energy efficient it can possibly be. LED lights, everything. I pay more in fuel subcharges than I do for the actual power I use. And I pay about $200 a month for electricity. I only use about $50 a month worth of electricity, but I pay $150 in fuel surcharges. That's insane.
Yeah,
so it's not worth it.
Yeah, we're looking at something baked into the economy, and that's why we're seeing this inflation. Not just, because they're saying it's two issues, right? You're saying it's a supply problem, right? It's a supply problem versus all the people that stayed at home. Now they're cooking more, they're using more things, they're because they stayed at home during the pandemic, and then but when we're coming out of the pandemic, why should that not go down? Why is gas not going down? Why is the price of groceries not going down? Why is the price of meat not going down? Why is that not leveling off? And so I'm waiting. If we're coming out of the pandemic and we're going to a different transition of the pandemic, then they should not stay high for the next year or 2 years. As we come into we're going to see that when it comes in the midterms, That's going to be the major issue. It's really an economic issue it's really economics. This is what we're talking about, how people feel about, and that's how they're going to vote.
And that goes back to my original point. If you are used to paying $10 for a steak instead of $4 or $5, you're going to continue to pay $10 for a steak. That company wants that profit. So that profit being $6 or $8, they're going to pay the guy cutting the steak $15. Okay, he wants $20. All right, we're going to give him an extra $5. But guess what? That steak is now $16, $18. Have you actually done anything?
So the economic thing that he put out in his thing, that we're doing great economically, I just don't ask any friend you are out there and say, do they feel like they're doing much better right now? And I don't think you're going to find anyone say, I'm doing a lot better.
Right.
So I'm going to say this with response to what Wade was saying. So you pay the butcher $20 an hour. The way that you keep the price of goods from going up is you cap the CEO's salary. That is one of the biggest issues at the moment. Again,
but until you do that, it doesn't matter what you pay the little guy. You have to do that first.
You have to, and you do have to cap the CEO first. Because if we look at the graph, and I wish I had a graph to pull up. So if you look at a graph at a certain point in history, minimum wage should have kept going up with inflation, and that would have been $26 back in, let's say, the spring or the summer of 2021. So $26 would have been minimum wage. However, when you have it, and I'm using this graph with my hand, at the same point that this should have been going up, it stayed stagnant. But the CEO's salary, instead of going this way to rise with inflation, it went this way. It just shot up. And again, I feel a lot of that did have to do with the trickle-down economic strategy, which was a massive failure, by the way. But again, if you cap the CEO's salary, you then open the door to being able to pay the everyday man a livable wage of $26 an hour.
But not at the moment. It doesn't matter what you do at the moment. Until you fix the
At the moment, I think $15 an hour is
matter.
doable. I think $15 an hour is doable. But with the recent spike in inflation, $15 an hour is literally the equivalent of, I want to say like $5. Like
that's what I'm saying. It doesn't matter. If you go to 20 right now, you're only making $6 an hour.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. You can complain all you want. I want $25 an hour. Okay, I'll give you $25 an hour. It's still only worth $7. Until you fix the problem up here, it's not going to matter because it's just going to be a linear move with everything.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest issues that hit America was really grabbing onto trickle-down economics and then making corporations God in this country. I think if you fix those two things, we're not necessarily in like a trickle-down economic type of economy right now. However, every time it switches, whenever we get a Republican in office, we start looking at things. We start looking at economic policies that resembles trickle down. Then we get the Democrats, and it's just not going to work because we keep going back and forth. And as we're going back and forth, inflation is kicking up. The American people cannot afford to live like this. So basically, this is what's going to happen. Inflation is going to keep rising. The Feds are going to try and level it out. We see that they're trying to keep the freight, the ocean freight from overcharging us, but none of that's going to matter. Within the next 6 months to 3 years, we're going to enter into a recession, and it's going to be a hard recession. And I think, now this is going to be a bold statement from me. Between the next 6 months to 3 years, we're going to hit a recession. And we're going to be in the middle of war during that recession. And I have a feeling that we're going to see a massive migration out of the country. We're going to see a lot of Americans not want to be in America anymore. and they're going to want to go to other countries. And we're going to see people leave America in ways they never left before.
I
So
completely disagree with that.
let me know.
All right. So here's my thoughts. All right. The problem is pinks and greens. And Sean knows what I'm talking about. All right. The last time the United States Army brought out the pinks and greens, we were in a world war. All right. So they're bringing the pinks and greens back. We're going back into a world war. But as funny as that is, just a little lighthearted levity here. When we go into this war, and we're going to war with Russia and everybody else, it's going to be a war unlike anything as anybody has ever seen. And manufacturing is going to ramp up to World War II levels. And unfortunately, I don't want to use the term gender roles, but I'm going to use the term gender roles in this example for clarity, are going to come back into effect. The men are going to go off to war. The women are going to go into the factories, and they're going to make planes and bombs and bullets and guns. That's what's going to happen.
I
And the
disagree.
companies aren't doing it for free.
I
The
disagree.
government's going to be paying them, and they're going to be printing money like they normally do. I think the problem's going to be when we come out of the war is when we're going to have the problem.
I disagree. I see us going into recession soon, sooner rather than later. The U.S. isn't set up for manufacturing. We can try and jump in right now. We'll see if this bipartisan bill does pass in order to try and buy America from beginning to end. I think something else that we have to realize is there is a great possibility that we will be going to war with China. It's not for certain, but there's a great possibility for that.
So I want to get
Well-
Amanda's goat.
What happened?
I want to get Amanda's goat. Go ahead, pull up her last comment.
Okay. You know who screwed during World War III? Those who had to sign up for selective services to qualify for financial aid for colleges and scholarships, all because who thought we'd go to war?
So selective service has been around since after the draft, and it's required for every able-bodied man and even unable-bodied man to sign up for selective service. You know who really gets screwed in this? All the men who signed up for it, because the women weren't required. Women have never been required to sign up for selective service. But just recently, they have been talking about making women sign up for it because y'all want to be equal. Well, guess what? When you get that draft letter, it ain't going to matter. And the funny thing about it is it's a big joke right now on social media with a buttload of women putting up these TikToks talking about, oh, I want to be equal. Then the draft comes out and they're like, oh, no, I'm going to stay home and I'm going to cook and I'm going to clean. So I find the hypocrisy completely amazing.
So I 100% that believe that women should be drafted.
Absolutely.
Honestly, did I ever tell you how I think the country should work?
Probably not.
So I'll give you a tiny piece of how I think the country should work. I believe that college should be free for every single American, because every single American from the ages of 18 to 20 should be required to serve in the United States military.
I'm
You
okay
serve
with
2
that.
years, you serve 2 years in the military, you get your free college. I think it would take a lot of stress off a lot of things in the United States. We're not there yet. We probably never will be, but that's what I think. I think every American should be able to serve in the military for 2 years, get your free college, move on. However, here is something that's going to have to happen. Now, selective services, the draft, is for the young folks. Now, us young folks have to be able to go in and pass several things in order to join the military. The military is going to have to change so many things. And I'm not even talking about drugs, because honestly, I don't know anyone from the ages of 21 to 35 who has not smoked weed. But let's not even talk about smoking weed, because they're not going to care about that if they're drafting you. What's going to be really, really hard for the military is the mental health crisis that has struck millennials and Gen Z. Millennials and Gen Z because of the era they grew up in, because every single part of their teenage to adult life has been one catastrophic event after another, are all on medication. They're all on therapy, and they all have some type of mental something, ranging from ADHD to anxiety to bipolar to depression. The United States military, in order to have a successful draft, if it comes to that, will have to completely change its policy on mental health, because no one will be drafted. No one who is a millennial or Gen Z will be able to be drafted because everyone's on anxiety pills.
And that's going to leave the rest of us. So
The rest of who?
the rest of us that are not millennials or Gen Z, that's going to leave the rest of us Gen Xers. They're going to call Sean in. They're going to call me in. They're going to say, it's your patriotic duty to go back. And I'm okay with that. But I'm just saying, creaky knees.
Before I go to the comments, I'm going to read the comments from here, from Smoking Bacon, and then we're going to call it a night. But before I read the comments, Sean, do you want to add anything
I'm
to...
dead. Amanda's funny as fuck tonight. They're too busy eating Tide Pods and inhaling lunch meats to sign up for it.
Wait, I just said I'm going to get to the comments. Sean, do you want to respond to anything Wade or me just said? Before we get to
What happened in the last world wars are not going to be the same that's going to happen in whatever we got coming here. It's a very much a technology war. It's an economic war. And we are an economic war. I mean, we're obviously taking economic war, unprecedented measures against Russia that are totally economic. Never happened in the history of our relations ever, in the history of the relations, or even with Europe as a relation. They've never did any of these economic things that they're saying. To close off airspace, that must mean we're concerned. I mean, we must be concerned if we're closing off airspace. So, I mean, that's an interesting scenario there. But also the high technology being the satellites that we have up, the technology that we have in space. No one talks about that. And for some reason now, this crazy thing of when our previous president said they were going to make a space force somehow makes sense now. Maybe it wasn't his idea at all.
Maybe it wasn't. All right, so I'm going to go to the comments. Amanda says, I don't know Mel anymore. Amanda, I'm sorry. I've always believed this. I just kept it very close. But I do think it helps. Now, Amanda is responding to my comment about how I think the country should run. It's probably never going to happen. But again, I believe that everyone from the ages of 18 to 20 to serve in the U.S. military, and afterwards, everyone gets free college. But again, never going to happen. Lindsay says, LOL, I've said the same thing Mel just said. Great minds think alike. Amanda says, I'm signing her up as tribute first. I would gladly go. So we all know that I tried to join the military, right? And the reason why they wouldn't let me in, like I was in MEPS, I was ready to go. And then at the very last moment, the psychiatrist runs through and says, you can't join because of that. I'm like, what? Because of I have a branding, it's a branding. It's like a literal branding. You know how you can go to like tattoo places and get a branding? I have a branding, but she said that the branding was a sign of mental illness. So that's why I didn't serve. But if they wanted to draft me, I think I'm a little bit too old right now to be drafted. If they wanted to draft me, I would go in.
They can draft you up till 45, I want to say.
Oh, look, I can still, oh, wait. I'm a woman. Again, I still think women should be drafted as well. But again, like I said, I would gladly go. So this was a funny comment. Amanda says, Mel said young folks like us, like she didn't just turn 33 with creaky knees. And he's still fine, girl. Lindsay says, I'm dead, Amanda. Holy shit, that made me truly LOL. Amanda says, they're too busy eating Tide Pods and inhaling lunch meat to sign up for a draft. I mean, don't you sign up when you
Every male has to sign up when they're 18, regardless of college or anything else. Mm-hmm. They hunt your ass down. They keep sending you stuff, and eventually they will get you. It's illegal for us not to sign up.
Yeah, but when you register to vote, like if you're a male and you register to vote, doesn't it happen automatically? So yeah.
I don't know. I had to sign up before then. So
Okay. So Lindsay says, you ain't wrong, Mel. Vlad! Amanda says, we will riot, laugh my ass off. Wasn't it Air Force? And then do you want to read a couple comments from Smoke and Bacon, and then we will call it a night.
So JPJR says the Swiss have been successful with mandatory military. Yeah, they have been. Las Vegas Luddite says, why? Why are Gen Z so fragile? I responded with trophies for everything. That's why. JPJR says, send us old guys too out of shape to run. Shoot straighter and already pissed about something. I would have to agree with that. Most of us, I ain't going to run at this point. You drop me in the middle of a war zone with a rifle, I'm going to tuck in right there because if I run, you're going to catch me. So we're going down one of the two ways. All right. So Las Vegas says used to be not when they're the only male child. Yes, that is a rule that goes back to World War I believe it is, Sean, when that family lost all three sons when they were serving together. If you were the only male child, you couldn't join the military and you couldn't sign up for the draft.
Yep. And then we're going to go these last two comments. Amanda says she tried to sign up for the Air Force. Thanks for letting my secrets out.
Well,
and
the Air Force really isn't a military. They're more like air traffic controllers. I'm just saying.
I mean, if you look at me, what branch do I look like I would join?
The Merchant Marines. I
have a finger for you.
I'm just saying.
For you, and it's not this one.
So.
Last comment of the evening. Lindsay says, I worked with Russia from the Cold War era, and he trained half his school days in military training. I would not go that far, but I do think. Philip says Army. Oh, no, Army was a little bit later in life, Philip. That was a little bit later in life. And that wasn't the Army. That was the Army National Guard. But it was originally in Jersey. It was the Air Force.
So Lindsay's sucking up, and Amanda nailed it.
Not even going to read that one. And then Lindsay says, I say Army or Marines, Mel. You know what? In my early 20s, I was kind of rugged. So that Marine life would have been good for me. I would have developed a taste for eating crayons.
Making the grass grow.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Mel. I have Wade and Sean here with me this evening from We Are the Power Hour panel. We come live every single Tuesday night to talk to you about current events, about what's happening across the globe. And right here in the great nation, you will hear us talk about Russia a lot because it's where we are. But we will continue to keep you updated about things going on across the globe. Have a great evening, everyone, and we will see you next Tuesday.